that night, scores of lives were shattered, along with the glass screen at LOD Airport, now Ben Gurion, when 3 Japanese Red Army terrorists indiscriminately sprayed machine gun fire and threw hand grenades in the arrivals hall.
The LOD Airport Massacre left 26 people dead and 80 injured. 8 were Israeli, 1 was Canadian, and the remaining 17 victims were U.S. citizens from Puerto Rico.
To this day, the event that occurred in Tel Aviv over 40 years ago is regarded in Puerto Rico as a great national tragedy. Even after the passage of 4 decades, the wounds inflicted on many Puerto Rican families remain raw. The terrorists had arrived in Israel on an Air France flight, and they began their attack as soon as they passed the ticket area and retrieved their cases, which had clearly not been subjected to any search at all before the flight, as they contained nothing but AK-47 submachine guns and grenades. Imagine a world today where you could turn up at an international airport shortly before your flight was due to leave and undergo a security check involving nothing more than a casual look through your suitcase. Imagine an arrivals hall that had a glass screen through which you could see the people you had come to meet, wave to them, and watch as they waited for their luggage. Imagine a world without the internet, iPhones, or Facebook to give you immediate information as it happens. There weren't even any 24-hour news stations on radio or television 40 years ago, so the first anyone heard of the attack was on that day's late evening TV news. Until May 30th, 1972, this was the innocent world we lived in. The operation was planned and supported by the Popular Front for the Liberation of Palestine and the former government of Libya. 2 of the terrorists were killed in the attack, and the 3rd was captured, tried by a military court, and sentenced to life imprisonment. He was released in 1983, however, as part of a prisoner exchange with the Palestinians. On the upcoming anniversary of the attack 41 years ago, the Insider-exclusive investigative TV series goes behind the headlines in Airport Terror, the LOD Airport Massacre, Remembrance. For the first time ever, to meet with some of the surviving family members of this massacre and their lawyer, David Efron, founding partner at the law offices of David Efron PC, who represented several victims who were victimized twice. First, when they lost their respective fathers in this gruesome terrorist attack at LOD Airport, and second, by their former lawyer who swindled them out of their settlement monies they should have received for the massacre of their fathers. On August 14, 2008, Libya entered into an agreement with the government of the United States, which established a fund for $1.8 billion to be administered by the United States Department of State to compensate all victims of terrorist acts sponsored by Libya. As a result, the plaintiffs appearing in this case were entitled to receive $10 million for the estates of each United States citizen killed by Libyan terrorism, on the condition that their lawsuit be dismissed since it was of no consequence to the diplomatic settlement.
The American Center for Civil Justice assigned an attorney named Joshua Ambush to help pursue litigation on behalf of the victims of the LOD Massacre, specifically the heirs located in Puerto Rico. Ambush was later found by the U.S. Court of Appeals for the First Circuit to have made misrepresentations to these same LOD Massacre victims, inducing them to sign additional retainer agreements. The court affirmed the earlier jury verdict that Ambush had secured his client's consent to additional retainer agreements by deceit.
David Efron represented the victims of this U.S. Court of Appeals decision, and as a result, he has earned the highest respect from citizens and lawyers alike as one of the best trial lawyers in San Juan, in Puerto Rico, and in the United States. His goals, not only to get justice for his clients, but to make sure that everyone is treated with equal respect and dignity as guaranteed under the Constitution of the United States. He has seen many innocent and hardworking people become victims, and because of that, he is driven to fight for people who have been harmed by the willful or negligent actions of others. He has built a substantial reputation by consistently winning cases other law firms have turned down. His amazing courtroom skills and headline-grabbing success rate continue to provide his clients with the results they need and the results they deserve. Since 2007, Puerto Rico has marked May 30th as LOD Massacre Remembrance Day to commemorate the events and honors both those murdered and those who survived, and educates the Puerto Rican public against terrorism. This insider exclusive investigative TV special is dedicated to the honor of these victims and their families. This is the Insider Exclusive, live from San Juan, Puerto Rico. It is my great privilege and pleasure to introduce David Efron to the show. Welcome to the show, David.
Thank you, Steve.
Now, the case that we're going to be discussing today is on the massacre that happened at what's now known as Ben Gurion Airport back in 1972, and a lawyer who got a little bit too greedy. Tell our audience a little bit about what happened.
Well, basically, the case starts in 1972. Terrorists at what is now Ben Gurion Airport, like you said, which at that time was LOD Airport in Israel, set out to murder and cause terror in Israel. American citizens have been victims of terror and have been targeted by terrorists for over 50 years. Fortunately, until 9/11, we did not have it happen inside our homeland, but Americans have always been targeted outside of the United States. The terrorists are extremists. They hate the American system, the American democratic system, the American way of life, the fact that we can choose or not choose to believe or to do as we see fit. And all of those liberties we have to fight for, and they are trying to take away from us with acts of terror. Those acts of terror leave behind victims that are United States citizens. In this case, there was a group of Puerto Rican Christian pilgrims that were visiting the Holy Land when terrorists that were hired by the PLO, at that point they had different initials, but it was the PLO. Today it would be Hamas or Hezbollah, because it morphed into those organizations. Hired what was known as the Japanese Red Army at a time when there was very little airport security anywhere in the world, even in Israel, and proceeded to just murder as many people as they could at the baggage claim area. It was not until 2008 where Libya, wanting to do business with the United States and the UK, mostly oil business, decided to compensate the families of the victims of both the Lockerbie Massacre and the LOD Massacre, which happened years earlier. Based on those negotiations between Libya, at that point, Gaddafi, now deceased, and the United States Department of State, certain compensations were agreed by the two countries in exchange for taking them off the terrorist lists and being able to do business with the United States and United Kingdom.
And they put up, I think it was what, $1.8 billion.
Well, that was the initial payment. I think it was closer to $3 billion, the total payment. They paid for each American that perished. They paid $10 million to the family.
Yeah.
For each American that was injured, they paid $3 million to that person. This case comes about when a dishonest lawyer, and I've got to tell you, I think that 99% of lawyers are honest. They serve their clients well, and they deserve the public trust that the public places on them. It's sometimes these bad apples that we have to go after and make sure that they don't keep doing what this particular lawyer has done. And what he did is, once there was an agreement in place and the money was in the bank, so to speak, he came for the first time to Puerto Rico to meet clients he had been representing in a lawsuit that, of course, went nowhere because all lawsuits had to be dropped for the diplomatic negotiations to take place. And he persuaded them, and by misleading them, by lying to them, and by withholding information, to sign a contract where he would get an additional 10% fee of everything he collected on $10 million estates for the death of each Puerto Rican U.S. citizen. We're talking about $1 million per estate, and he did this to a number of people in Puerto Rico. He misled them by withholding information, by not telling them that even if they didn't sign that agreement, they would still get the money, by not telling them that the only thing left to do in the case was to voluntarily dismiss it because it was worthless. And by not telling them that he had already been paid by an organization that the victims were already paying 20% for, including their legal fees.
And that was the American Center for Civil Justice,
correct.
I believe. They already had a retainer agreement with each one of these families.
For 20%.
Whatever they recovered, 20% of that recovery would be paid to that Justice Center.
And that would include legal fees. They retained, hired, and paid this lawyer as well as other lawyers in this case.
Right. And that lawyer that you filed suit against was Joshua Ambush.
Correct. A very appropriate name, because what he did is he showed up in Puerto Rico with an investigator, a translator, a notary public, and sort of pressured these people, and you will meet them shortly. They're very nice, humble, salt-of-the-earth people, but they're not very sophisticated or educated.
They were naive.
They were naive. They were country folk. And basically, he was able to, by misleading them, take advantage of them, by withholding information, make them sign, and sort of, ambush them. If my clients understood English, they would know, they would be a little more careful once they heard his name. But he sort of ambushed them into signing these fraudulent agreements for the additional 10%.
So for the record, the families were paid $10 million each.
Well, actually, they received $7 million.
Yeah,
because
but they originally $10 million, and then the Center for this American Justice
received 20%.
20%, and Joshua Ambush
kept 10%. Kept
another $1 million or 10%
from each estate.
And what happened after that when you were brought into the case?
Well, I was brought in. Some lawyer had already sued him, and the lawyer, for reasons that are not relevant, sort of disappeared, left Puerto Rico. Case was dismissed, and then they came to me. Somebody must have recommended our firm. They came to me, and and when they came to me, the case was practically dismissed. We had to revive it, reopen it, and push forward for a quick trial, which we did. And at that trial, a civil jury of Puerto Rican citizens, it was U.S. citizens from Puerto Rico, I should say, in a federal courthouse, decided unanimously, ruled that these families had been swindled by the technical term in Spanish is something else, which means fraud, but they were defrauded by this lawyer.
And they ordered that he pay the money back. He appealed it.
He appealed it.
It went to the First Circuit Court of Appeals,
which affirmed the judgment.
Right.
And their motion for reconsideration, for a rehearing, has just been denied. So
yes.
we're now going to be in the process of going forward and collecting that debt.
Because he's had the money since 2009, I believe, right?
Well, we assume so,
Yeah.
but we don't know that.
Today we have with us some of these families. We're going to bring on two representatives of them, so let's do that right now.
Remember that the people you're going to hear are people that were victims twice.
Yes.
Once by terrorists and once by an unscrupulous, dishonest lawyer.
Yeah. So let's bring them on right now.
Of course.
It is my great pleasure to introduce Efrain Berganzo. Welcome to the show, Efrain. Tell our audience a little about going back to 1972, what you remember, what happened that day when your dad was murdered.
Y me notificaron que había habido un accidente en Israel y que mi papá quizás estuviese herido. Y yo, pues, lo primero que me vino a la mente que mi papá estuviera muerto. Pues, bajo las circunstancias, estas, pues, se estaban notificando por radio y se estaba diciendo que se estaba dando visa de emergencia para ir a socorrer a los heridos o muertos. Y yo me fui al aeropuerto a hacer las gestiones.
We initially thought it was an accident at the airport in Israel, and we understood that our father had been hurt. The first thing that came to my mind, which proved to be true, is that he was killed. Based on the news on the radio, they were giving visas to anybody who wanted to go to Israel to help the victims. And then I went to the airport, and ¿qué pasó en el aeropuerto?
Pero allí estaba el secretario, en el aeropuerto estaba el secretario o ayudante del gobernador en ese tiempo. Y me dijo, ¿tú eres el señor Berganzo, hijo del reverendo? Digo, sí, ¿qué tú vas a hacer allá? Yo le dije, bueno, me dijeron que supuestamente estaba herido. Dice, no, él está en una nevera. Está muerto.
When I got to the airport, there was a government official there that identified me and asked me what I was going to do in Israel. And he said that Efrain answered that he was going to see what he could do for his father and the other victims that were hurt. And the man checked the list and said, no, your father's dead, he's in a cooler. There's nothing for you to go over there to do.
When you found out that you had been defrauded by the attorney Ambush, what were your immediate thoughts?
Bueno, lo primero, me sentí decepcionado y estaba buscando un recurso legal para tomar acción. Después vi una notificación, un escrito en newspaper, y encontré el licenciado David Efron, la que me puso al tanto, y comenzamos el litigio.
When I realized what had happened, I felt disappointed and betrayed, and I was looking for some legal recourse. I saw an advertisement in the paper, and eventually David Efron represented us.
I want to thank you very much for being on this show, because you serve as a reminder to everybody that persistence and perseverance with the right lawyers can get you justice. It is my great pleasure to introduce Noemi Rodriguez to the show. Welcome to the show. Your dad was killed in 1972 at the LOD Massacre, LOD Airport Massacre. What do you miss most about your dad?
Bueno, como padre no le hace falta por no tenerlo uno al lado. El vacío que le queda a uno al no tener el padre de uno.
The emptiness of not having your father next to you.
You were victimized not only by the terrorist, but also by a lawyer by the name of Joshua Ambush. What is your opinion of justice in America today?
Quedó perfecto en jurado. Sí, quedó bien.
She's very happy with the jury system.
I want to thank you so much for being on this show. Thank you. You know, David, this has been an amazing case. When we first started looking at it, it was very unfortunate what happened, you know, in Israel. But then on top of this, when you have a lawyer taking advantage of, you know, regular, ordinary people, I am so glad that you stepped into the case and got them justice. There is justice in America, isn't there?
For the most part, there is. You know, a lot of people are attacking our jury system, a lot of people are attacking our judicial system, but it's the best in the world. Mm-hmm. It's not perfect, but it's the best we have, and when you look at the lack of justice in other systems and in other countries, you tend to value more what we have in America.
Well, persistence does pay off, and I want to thank you for not only representing these clients, but also being on this show.
Thank you for inviting us. It was an honor.
Thanks for joining us. You can get more information about our guest and the issues at insiderexclusive.com.